My name is Will, and this is the 7th video in a series about the DC Comics character Martian Manhunter. This will primarily cover the character's appearances from 1977 to 1983, a time period roughly corresponding to the later part of the Bronze Age of comics. To be honest, this is a pretty uneventful time for J'onn J'onzz since he isn't a regular in any comic, but his status as a founding member of the Justice League has writers come back to him and keep him alive. There are 4 stories during this time, and I'm going to go over each one to some extent. Let's get started. In 1977, a guy named Steve Engelhart quit Marvel, and he got hired by DC. He agreed to work on Justice League for a year to fix it. Now, Steve is sometimes described as the first of a new generation of comics writers who grew up as fans of comics, and it is obvious he loves continuity and wants a consistent world. This really shows up in Justice League of America 144, where he gives a new take on the origin of the Justice League. Steve Engelhart had either noticed or been told about a slight inconsistency in the Justice League. The Justice League comic detailing the origin of the League, Justice League number 9, was released in February of 1962. In this issue, Martian Manhunter tells Green Arrow and Snapper Carr that the League was founded exactly 3 years ago. It's exact because they are celebrating an anniversary, the framing device for relating the original origin. This would mean the League was founded in February of 1959. This date is 7 months before Green Lantern first shows up in September of 1959 in Showcase 22. Who cares about crazy details like this? Steve Engelhart cares. In Justice League 144, he has Green Arrow notice the disparity, and he flies off the handle and calls the rest of the League liars. This is actually a framing device for Engelhart to tell a revised origin of the Justice League, which fixes this timing inconsistency. This revised origin centers around founding member J'onn, and it's a little bit odd, but incredibly well researched. Now, the origin is told to Green Arrow by J'onn, who recorded an old tape explaining it, another framing device. Anyway, this story recounts the origin of J'onn J'onzz and his being brought to Earth by Erdell. It is true to the original origin and has J'onn state that he is a scientist and that he wants to go home. This retelling even copies a large part of the dialogue from Detective Comics 225. It does keep the idea introduced by Dennis O'Neil that J'onn was a political exile before he came to Earth. One slight change from the original is that this telling emphasizes how afraid people are. One interesting panel is where people are afraid that comic books would make kids juvenile delinquents, a not very subtle stab at the Senate hearings in 1954 about comics, a year before the Martian Manhunter first appeared. After this retelling, it tells a story that fits in 6 months before the original Justice League origin story. In this story, the character, introduced by Dennis O'Neil, Blanks, comes to Earth in order to kill J'onn. He's accompanied by a pack of what are described as pale-skinned Martians. Now, in my last video, I talked about how the text and art were out of sync in Justice League 71, but at this point, Dennis O'Neil was off reinventing Batman. But Dick Dillon was still doing the art, so art wins. The aliens the Justice League fought in Justice League 71 that were supposed to be Antarans, but looked like Blanks, officially became Martians in this comic, and their skin color is actually called out in the text, with them being called pale-skinned Martians. The presence of these pale-skinned Martians and their battles against J'onn trigger a fear of an alien invasion. The word gets out, and a host of DC comic characters show up to hunt down aliens. In fact, this episode connects to a huge amount of DC lore with a ridiculous amount of guest stars from 1959. This huge group of DC characters splits up to hunt aliens. The founding members of the Justice League, minus Hal Jordan and J'onn J'onzz, form a group along with Robin, Roy Raymond, and Rex the Wonder Dog. They go to Cape Canaveral and they meet Hal Jordan, who is not yet Green Lantern. He helps them find Blanks and his forces who had captured J'onn. The team that will be the Justice League battles the pale-skinned Martians, who are noted as being extremely powerful due to their being on Earth. So they keep this Silver Age tidbit that O'Neil kept alive. Batman frees J'onn, who tells them of the Martians' weakness. The weakness is changed a bit to be heat instead of flames, and Superman is basically able to easily defeat Blanks and all the Martians with heat visions. Superman prepares to take Blanks and the other Martians back to Mars, including J'onn. But J'onn does not want to return. He declares his disillusionment with Mars and his love for Earth. Superman, a fellow alien on Earth, empathizes with this, and the heroes decide to let J'onn stay on Earth. This cleans up the timing of the inconsistency of being trapped on Earth and having friends who can take him back to Mars very nicely. And you do get a sense in this issue that Engelhart is collecting all these inconsistencies and cleaning them up. The assembled heroes plan on how to reveal Ja'an to the people of Earth. They decide that in 6 months' time they would reveal him and stand behind him to give him support and legitimacy. So in this retelling, the Justice League's primary purpose was to support Ja'an, which brings a tear to Green Arrow's eyes because he's a giant softie. But also, it makes clear that the League has a special significance to Ja'an, and this idea would last well beyond this issue. It'll be a theme I repeatedly revisit. This issue of Justice League is just chock full of references and guest stars. It is clear that Engelhart loves comics and loves the lore and continuity, and that he probably read every comic that came out in 1959. This issue is full of incredible detail, but I'm only going to go over to the details as they pertain to Ja'an. Okay, so power and appearance-wise, this issue is kind of a reset. Going back to Ja'an's origin brings back the Martian brow, which had disappeared years ago. Dillon and Engelhart also bring back the style of drawing a Martian head around Ja'an when he is in human form. Power-wise, Engelhart brings back Ja'an's abilities. The Martian ability to change shape comes back, and he even reconciles Ja'an's early nature of just taking the shape and his later power to copy the abilities of his new form. Ja'an is shown as resistant to flames in his human form, but he explains that this is a skill that he had developed, but that the other Martians haven't learned. Martian super senses and visibility also return. Strength-wise, Superman once again compares Martian and Kryptonian strength, saying that the Martian's strength rivals his own. In terms of invulnerability, Ja'an says that he can't be killed while on Earth, and the White Martians plan to shoot him into space in order to actually be able to kill him. In terms of weaknesses, Engelhart makes some slight changes. Martians had always been vulnerable to fire, and Engelhart changes this to heat, like I mentioned before. In the original Ja'an comic run, he stated that Martian weapons could hurt him, and this is fleshed out. Martians use microwave weapons, which greatly pain Ja'an and are able to knock him out. So he's introducing a new kind of weakness which isn't quite so common as fire. Note that microwave ovens were commercially available at this point in 1977, but were very much a luxury item and very few homes had them. So microwaves had a nice air of science mystery at the time. Engelhart is tuned into so many details, referencing Detective Comics 264, where Ja'an had to deal with criminals who had Martian weapons, and Detective Comics issue 273, where he loses the ability to use his powers while invisible. This story includes Captain Harding, Erdell's robot brain, and Middletown. Actually, the name Middletown is probably used more in this issue than all previous occurrences of that name from Detective Comics and House of Mystery. But Engelhart's story doesn't completely line up, and in this story, Erdell's robot brain is destroyed instead of being a tool to allow Ja'an to travel through space. But it does offer a better explanation of why Ja'an decides to stay on Earth. Ja'an gives a speech about his love for Earth and his desire to stay there and make a difference. He describes Mars as a world of lost causes and dead dreams. This reverses O'Neill's explanation of Ja'an being on Earth because he was serving out the length of a political exile, and returns him to actually wanting to be on Earth, but does so more eloquently than ever before. It does, however, ignore Ja'an's family. In the Silver Age, his connection to Mars all revolved around his family, his parents and his younger brother, and they don't get mentioned when he decides to stay on Earth. While in the Silver Age, they seem like the primary thing Ja'an missed on Mars. Now, the explanation for wanting to stay on Earth and the description of Mars being a place of lost causes and dead dreams feels inspired by Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, where Mars is depicted as a decaying civilization. And this won't be the last time I talk about the competing literary influences of Burroughs and Bradbury, so buckle up! All in all, Steve Engelhart does a great job trying to tie things together that would please all but the most detail-obsessed freaks. I mean, he was trying to clean up a character that basically wasn't even in the comics anymore. Sadly, this would be Engelhart's only story with Ja'an, but it did help put Ja'an back on the map. In fact, the next year DC made plans to bring Ja'an back as a backup feature in Aquaman, as part of an event marketed as the DC Explosion. Sadly, this DC Explosion was followed by an event known as the DC Implosion, and Aquaman was cancelled, so no new feature for Ja'an. Len Wein would be the next writer to take up the Martian Manhunter in DC Comics Presents 27, which was a Superman team-up book at the time. In this comic, John would act as an antagonist and foil for Superman, and he would present a slightly different version of John. In this issue, Mongul is introduced, and he holds Superman's friends hostage in order to force him to acquire the plans for the Death Star. I mean the key to Warworld. For reference, Star Wars was in 1976, and this comic was in 1980. The key was guarded by the Martian Manhunter, and Mongul needed to enlist Superman because Mongul himself couldn't defeat John. So Superman goes out to try and obtain the key and encounters John. Superman and John greet each other, but John is a little colder and more suspicious than in the past. John explains the incredible danger the key represents, and that if Mongul had the key, it would lead to countless deaths. But Superman brushes him off with, "I'm Superman, I know what I'm doing."
Because the needs of the one outweighed the needs of the many.
John declares his friendship for Superman, and then begins to attack him, starting with a sucker punch.
Oh, Superman and Martian Manhunter are gonna fight. This is terrible. This is awesome.
Superman then drops John with a single punch, and claims that John is no match for him, and John reluctantly agrees. John then fires kryptonite missiles at Superman, but Superman deflects them. So, being a friend to Superman while also preparing to defeat him with kryptonite is a thing John did in 1980, Batman. John attacks Superman again and is easily defeated, especially since Superman uses his heat vision to start fires. Note that you have a reversal on Engelhart turning the weakness to just heat, and Superman actually has to create flames to weaken John. But while defeating John, he reflects on what a hero John is and regrets having to fight him. So this fight is very different than the last. Dennis O'Neil had John really only use a subset of Superman's powers, but he had Martian Manhunter be very close in terms of physical power. Len Wein has Superman dominate John, and Superman is shown as stronger and tougher. I'm going to give this one to Superman and making it Superman 2 and Martian Manhunter 0. After Superman has the key, Mongul shows up. Superman suddenly changes his mind and decides not to give ridiculous power to a murderous tyrant.
The needs of the many outweigh
The needs of the few.
or the one.
But before Mongul can kill his friends, John frees them by using his invisibility to sneak up on Mongul. But Superman gets blasted by Mongul and drops the key. Mongul is able to grab the key and teleport away. Then John verbally lays into Superman, chewing him out and demanding that he do something. And he is Superman, so of course he's going to do something. And this happens in a Superman team-up book, so of course John isn't going to do anything because he has to clear the stage for the next character to team up with Superman. So, in this story, John acts as a foil for Superman. Superman is brash and overconfident. He makes bad decisions driven by emotions. But John gets to play the wise and responsible one. And while one-issue personality shifts aren't a big deal in comics, I feel this is interesting because John, as the wise one who doesn't make hasty emotional decisions, is a direction his character takes in the future, largely acting as a foil for Aquaman instead of Superman. This direction would largely happen under Jerry Conway, the next author to use John. Conway would bring John back in Justice League 177 and 200 and would finally bring him back into the Justice League as a member in issue 228. The first story is interesting for a couple reasons. One is the references to the Edgar Rice Burroughs book, The Chessman of Mars. The comic story is called The Chessmaster of Mars, and Ray Palmer refers to John as the Chessman of Mars. Both this story and Burroughs' book have the idea of a game of chess where living pieces duel to the death. In this case, John is playing directly against Despero, and the Justice League are the pieces. This directly calls back to the first issue of the Justice League, where Flash plays a chess-like game against Despero using the League as pieces. But you can see that the works of Burroughs and his stories about Mars had a big influence on this generation of writer. So if you thought all my Edgar Rice Burroughs references were out of place, here is direct evidence of his influence. The next time Conway uses John is in issue 200, which is kind of an anniversary issue. It calls back to Justice League number 9 and the founding of the League. The traditional founding, not the Engelhart founding. And the issue recounts this origin. Then it has the 7 founding members, including John, mind-controlled by the Appalachians, and they battle all the new members. So first you get a bunch of old League versus new League battles, and then a giant team-up where the entire League goes after the Appalachian golems. This brings John back from Mars 2. He fights Firestorm and is able to knock him out. Later, he works with Firestorm to fight the golems. He then muses about returning to the League after he fulfills his responsibilities on Mars 2. This John has some surprising powers in addition to his old mainstays like strength, flight, and invisibility. He's able to survive in space and seems to travel from Mars to without a spacecraft. He also has his Martian vision I-beams, which he hadn't used for a long time, and it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. Conway also has John's weakness be to heat and not flames, just like in Engelhart's depiction. Now, when John muses about rejoining the League, I wonder if it was Conway really thinking about this, because Conway would eventually be the one to fully reintroduce the Martian Manhunter back into DC Comics in 1984, after his scattered appearances during the Bronze Age. The trickle of Bronze Age appearances did keep the character around and served as a reminder that John was a founding member of the League. Engelhart's retelling of the origin and Conway's anniversary issue both highlight this role. And although his personality and powers undergo some slight shifts during this time, the idea that he is close friends with the Justice League never wavers. I'm going to talk about Jerry Conway's time with John, but before that I'm going to take a slight detour in the next video to talk about the limited series Jim, Son of Mars, that became retooled to be Jem, Son of Saturn. As always, like, subscribe, and comment to encourage me to keep making content.